Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Exo Heroes video. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and that is talking about the good and bad of Exo Heroes. What we like about the game, what we don't like, and some potential solutions that we think would make the game a little bit better. So we're of course interested to hear what you guys have to say. We'd love to hear what you like, what you don't like, and what the game could do better as well. If you agree with our points, or if you don't, please like either way, and drop us a subscribe. Without further ado, let's get started. And just for the sake of this video, why don't we start talking about the good things first, the things that we like about the game.
Yeah, sure. And I think, obviously we've played this game for quite a while now. We've been doing a lot of content on it, and it's safe to say we really enjoy the game. I think there's a lot to like about Exos Heroes. The way the game presentation works, some of the unique mechanics that the game offers. I think there's a lot to like here. But obviously, as we'll get into a little bit later, there are definitely things that we think the game can improve as well. But starting out with, first thing we like about it is it's relatively free-to-play friendly. And I think there are some community concerns about, Exos Heroes is not really good for the dolphins. A lot of the pricing are kind of too high. It's hard to spend a little bit of money and enjoy the game. I think that is true, but at the same time, I do think the game does offer a lot to free-to-play players. And from our channel's perspective, we're actually pretty free to play. If you guys didn't already notice, we don't spend much money on this game at all. So far, we've spent only about $26 on purchasing the Exos Pass. But at the same time, we've been able to do a lot of hero polling each weekend. We've been able to make all these videos. And I think up until today, as we speak right now, out of all the Fated heroes, we're only missing like 7 or 8 of them.
Yeah.
So we're able to collect a lot of heroes, which is obviously one of the main attraction of gacha games. So I think that's one thing that Exos Hero has been doing really well in terms of just being able to keep the game interesting for the free-to-play players. And that's something I think deserves a lot of credit.
Right, I think to elaborate a little bit more on that point about how free-to-play friendly this game is, like you said, you could keep pulling every week. I mean, we've been relatively free to play, and we've been doing 100 pulls for every summoning Saturday. If you want to see those pull videos, we have those on our channel, so please check those out. But I think that one of the advantages that this has for, player retention and the longevity of the game is just that it helps, free-to-play players or like low-spending players feel like they're not falling too far behind. Because having played a decent number of other gacha games myself, every game gives you a different vibe, and sometimes you play a game and it's just very aggressive in the way that they encourage you to spend money, right? It's like if you
Raid Shadow Legends.
I mean, I don't want to name names, but you went there. Because, games like that, there's pop-up ads. When you log in, there's like boom, 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 like 3 or 4 ads. When you click on some menu, there's more ads. And then it's like other games have just mechanics built in where like you cannot progress any further unless you pay, or you cannot get any further in PvP ranking unless you pay. And I think because you could pull so often, and we're only missing 8 Fated heroes out of the, I don't know how many Fated heroes there are, but there's multiples of 10, there's a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think that it helps us feel like, hey, you know what, we can still compete. We're getting these nice Fate cores like Fate Core Rira, Fate Core Rachel. And I think that had we not gotten those champions, playing through daily and doing those grinds would be a lot more frustrating and a lot less fun for us. So I think that by giving these freebies to players, it really helps maintain a wide player base, which is obviously great for the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second thing we want to point out is we do find the characters very interesting. And obviously you can see that unlike some of the other gacha games, Exos Hero definitely putting a lot of effort into creating intertwining backstories for a lot of the characters, right? Almost all the characters, they are not just a standalone hero that has nothing to do with other people, right? Like each one of them has a very unique interaction, whether it's in the gameplay or it's just based on their lore. And I really like to point out the fact that, like I just mentioned, they are actually able to extend the backstory into the gameplay of these characters, whether it's through the way their ability works. For example, Garth. He is this righteous commander of the Vanguard. And you can tell just by looking at his skills, right? He's charging in with, the rest of his men. He's got this command passive that makes everyone a little bit more tankier, a little bit more survivable. It's very coherent with his backstory. And at the same time, we also see other synergies as well. Shufraken, for example, great synergy with his both of his kids, Valentina and Remka. And obviously, we also have Rachel, who has synergy with his rival Baraka. So there are a lot of very interesting gameplay elements that are tied in together with the story. Just makes the entire world a little bit more immersive as the player plays through it.
Right. I mean, like you said, it's definitely more immersive. It's more engaging. Because, I mean, when we pulled FC Rachel, we had read his backstory on the base Rachel, we've read his lore, and it sort of made me feel like, man, I really want to pull, the heroes that he has synergy with. I know you don't want Shah Khan, but, it was like, I just wanted to see that synergy in action, and I think it gives players a little something to look forward to, right? It makes the game a little bit more fun and alive.
Absolutely.
Rather than playing games that are just like, you have this hero, he does X, Y, and Z, and, that's it.
Right.
Now, I will say that compared to some other games, other gadget games, like, let's say, Fate Grand Order, right, if we're going to name names again, because that game has such an extensive history spanning, over 10 years of story building and all of that, alternate universes. So there's a lot going on there, and Exo Heroes is a much smaller undertaking in terms of that, but I think that they've still done a great job of creating this story that you want to know what happens next. It is interesting, and I kind of wish they did a little bit more with it, but more on that later in the video.
Yeah. On the same point, I think one thing worth pointing out is some of these synergies doesn't always make sense, right? Like, for example, one thing we can think of is Bathory.
With Rira and Ulum.
Right, why Bathory has a synergy with Rira and Ulum, like, it just doesn't make sense. When there's Anastasia, who is Bathory's sister, why she doesn't get a synergy, right? So, like, there are certain things that feel like a little bit forced, but at the same time, I think most of the time, a lot of these synergies and these skills definitely make sense, and I think that did a good job on most of them.
Right. Overall, I mean, I think they've done a fantastic job. Now, one point that I believe you brought up is the game utilizes all levels of characters well. So there's obviously 1-star all the way up to 5-star, but within the top 3 tiers like Fated, Legendary, and Rare, there's a niche for all of those heroes, right? Like, there are some rare heroes that do carry value throughout the game. So why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I think it just comes down to the way the devs design this game. And I think they definitely put in some thought into, we need to somehow be able to promote the game to the free-to-play player as well. And I think this is one of the ways that they did that, is to make some of the rare heroes or the legendary heroes a little bit more versatile, a little bit more impactful at the game, so that you're not dependent only on the fated heroes. Like, heroes like Kaya is one of the best healer in the game, and she's only rare. Xiang is very good on his own, and he's, another rare hero, and there are just a lot of legendary heroes out there that brings very good utility and very good value to any of the players, and the chance of getting those heroes are quite high. So I think it's one thing that the game has done really well. And another thing is, the game has deliberately built in mechanisms that requires rare heroes and legendary heroes. And we see this through, the special dungeons, right? So the game is telling players, hey, there's value in these heroes, there's need to, use them. And that actually creates a lot of diversity in the game in terms of both utilizing different characters, as well as utilizing and finding out different strategies, because you're kind of forced into diversifying your lineup. And I think those are very cool mechanisms that this game has that I haven't seen in a lot of other games.
Right. I mean, we mentioned other gachas throughout this section of the video, and I totally agree with you. I mean, currently I'm playing a couple other gachas, and so it's like, for those, the strategy is just get as many 5-star, 6-star heroes as you can, and then just bulldoze your way through the game. Right, and there's no like dailies, there's no content that does require you like, hey, why don't you bring these, lesser tier heroes into your squad? And I think that what it helps players do as well is bridge that gap between the early game learning and then bring those heroes into some daily content too, some farming content where you're going to familiarize yourself with it and then be able to replace those heroes later.
Absolutely, and it just makes it a little bit less resource intensive, right? A lot of the heroes that we get earlier in the game, we can build up and they still have a place to use in the later stage of the game as well, instead of a lot of other games like Raid Shadow Legends, for example. I've played that game for quite a while now, and a lot of the heroes that I get in the very early stages of game are essentially useless as I get into the later stage, right? Like, now, I'm just looking forward to heroes that are actually good, that are actually impactful, I'm looking at a lot of the older heroes that just like, why
And
are they even there?
It feels wasted. Like when you pull them, it feels really bad.
You spend a lot of time and resource into leveling them up, only to realize that they are
obsolete.
Substantially, exactly. Yeah. So
now, that is sort of a segue into our next point that we wanted to bring up, which is it's very casual player friendly. And I want to make the distinction here between free-to-play friendly and casual friendly, because free-to-play just means you don't spend money, right? But you could play 24/7, like you could be on the game grinding every day, every second, and you'd be a hardcore player. But luckily, Exo Heroes doesn't really require that level of commitment. In terms of gacha games typically fall into involved grinding or active grinding and AFK grinding, right? And for me, I think Exo Heroes has struck a good balance within AFK grinding, where you do need a little bit of preparation. Like for instance, the daily dragon raids, right? You can go in 3 times a day, and then every day it's a different element, nature, fire, whatever, and that does require a little bit of preparation. It's not like you just press a button, you go in, and it's completely AFK. But you do have to, put some thought into
how you set up the team.
Right, put some thought into how to set up the team. And then I think that is, sort of that balance is needed. Also, there's a little AFK screen that saves battery while the game is still running content in the background, which I think is fantastic.
I agree, but I think, that's a double-edged sword. And that kind of, bridges into our next topic is, well, at the same time, sure, like, it's very casual player friendly. You don't have to be on this game all the time. But at the same time, I think Exos Hero at the moment is treading a very, very thin line of being casual player friendly or be considered as a lacking of content. And I think one of the issue is, like you mentioned, right, there's daily missions you can complete. There are also, these specific areas of the game, you can consider them dungeons that you can complete. And obviously all of those, you can only do it for so many times in a day. Most of the time you only get 3 tickets to each one of the areas. So it doesn't really take too long to finish what you can do in a day. So on the one hand, that's very casual player friendly. You can do it a little bit and enjoy the game and still be able to keep up with most of the other people. But at the same time, I think it's almost getting to a point where I feel like to some of the more seasoned player, the player who are looking for a little bit more gameplay, it's almost getting to a point where I can consider it to be lacking of content. And, for us, we've only played this game for a little bit over a month. And we have essentially unlocked every area of the game. We've climbed pretty high in the PvP ladder, and at this point there's no more story for us to progress through anymore. So we're really down to a point where we log on for 30 minutes, we'll do our dailies, we'll do our dungeons for, using our tickets 3 times a day, and that's it. Like, there is nothing else for us to do, and I think that could be quite concerning.
Right, and so I think that as we went over some of the points that you just covered, we're having this transition from talking about the positives to talking about some of the negatives or the grievances that we have with the game. And I think that a lot of the community actually shares these similar thoughts, right, regarding lack of content, specifically within the story. Now, what we want to try to do is, again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't want to just rag on the game and say this is bad, but also provide potential solutions. So I think that part of the problem is, once the MSQ is done, once the main story quests are all finished, as it should be for most players that play maybe 3 or 4 weeks, then what are you going to do for, the next month that you play? So part of the problem is Exo Heroes has such a beautiful story, and they do such a great job of tying in the lore with the characters and having, all of these unique and interesting units in the game. But I think that there's an opportunity there where we don't really explore those stories, right? For instance, I think like Garf's story is really interesting. Bathory's story is very interesting. Shufraken and his relationship with his children and Mahar, and then you also have like Chatty, all of these really interesting sort of quirky characters. So why don't we have these sort of mini chapters, for instance, where let's say you unlock Garf, or maybe you need their FC to do it or something. You unlock this fated hero, and then it gives you like an extra 5 quests where you really explore that hero's history, and you can play through, like, for instance, Garf, his lore is he started out as a common person, and he wanted to become a general,
right.
So he did all these things to get where he is today. Why don't we get to play through that?
I think that's a very unique idea. Essentially, you're able to do a little bit more content specific to the hero and see a little bit more of those like story tie-ins. And I think one thing unique about this game that actually works really well with that is the game has unique weapons, right?
I was just gonna bring that up.
And what if you can actually do a little bit of these like mini chapters, as you suggested, specific to these heroes? Make them a little bit difficult, make them a little bit more challenging, right? So it's unique, it's not easy to go through them. But when you do get through them, then as a part of the reward, you can get their then get their fated weapon. So I think there are a lot of potentials here, which I really hope the devs can take on here and expand on what is currently in the game right now. But I think at the moment, it does feel like the game is a little bit stale.
Right. I think that, to go back to that point a little bit, it helps bridge the gap between the casual play, the free-to-play players, keeping them invested, keeping them excited and looking forward to that next little carrot, that next little reward that they could get, and covering up some of the lack of story content that there is in the game. But unfortunately, story isn't the only thing that's lacking. I think that once you get to the point of the game where we're at, there's also seems to be a lack of strategy outside of PvP, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I think this really goes hand in hand with the lack of content. I think at the moment, once we're outside of the main story quest and once we're outside of, the PvP area, it's really kind of a rinse and repeat process with most of the content that they're offering. And I do find the difficulty a little bit low. I think a lot of the issue that we're having today is the game is too focused on getting the right heroes rather than setting up the right strategy. And what I mean by this is, currently the most challenging part of the game is probably the special dungeons that we see each day in different areas. And the special dungeons, what they require you is they have these character requirements, right? Like a rare hero, fire element, male, mage, right? Like this type of requirements where you have to satisfy all 4 in order to start a specific battle. But once you get into the battle, assuming that your hero is of sufficient level, it's geared up to a sufficient level as well, then there really isn't much in terms of strategy. It's very similar to any other battle that you would experience in the game. And I think that's something that the game can expand on a lot more. Instead of only focusing on getting the heroes that you need, focus on the boss mechanics, right? Have unique bosses that has very unique skills that requires a certain type of team comp to be able to effectively fight against them. And I think that's something I haven't seen in this game, but it's a very widely adopted mechanism in a lot of other gacha games. And that's something I really want to see in Exos Heroes.
So I just want to take this opportunity to go over maybe some ideas for what strategic content would look like. You were talking about unique mechanics, and one of the ideas that I had, right, was to see, once you play through the entire game, once you beat the story, so to speak, why don't you have the option to go through it again as like a challenge mode, right, or a new game plus, and then just you do the exact same content, so it wouldn't be terribly hard for the devs to do as you're recycling a lot of those assets.
Yeah.
But just have little bonuses and rewards, of course, tied in with this. For instance, in a gacha game I play, Arknights. In that game, once you beat a chapter, you can go back and do the challenge mode of that chapter, where it's like, for instance, enemies have double speed,
right,
or defender enemies have twice the health.
Yeah. Summoner's War has this as well, right? Like you can go through the main map with all the stories, and then you can do the hard mode, and then you can do the extreme mode.
Right, and then it unlocks, you have to beat hard before you get to extreme, because other gacha games do have this. Now, why don't we try to actually make it a little bit more unique, right? Because Exo Heroes, there's a lot of potential for this game, which is why I love it so much and why I'm trying to come up with these ideas, right? But maybe one thing could be like, because right now bosses, especially if you look at, like those special dungeons or especially Holy Dragon Grounds, where Dragon has like, 1/3 of a million HP, he's got so much HP, and it just becomes like a, how long can you survive, and just like how much of this sponge can you chip off, basically. But why don't we have a boss that's like, instead of just damaging his HP bar, let's say he has a unique passive that's like, I don't know, Rainbow Guardian Stone or something, where it's like every hero in your squad needs to be a different element, and they need to attack him without repeating elements, and then like each time you do a % of his HP. But if you but if you hit him with the same element twice, then you don't do damage, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So it requires you to, like, you can't just run everything with FC Rira. You
Right.
can't just run everything with Bathory or Garf or, you know, some other overpowered character.
Right.
And I think that would just bring so much more variety into the PvE element and just give it more life instead of relying on PvP to drive your player base into like the next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing is also very glaring is the fact that right now there isn't a boss hero in the game, right? Like other than the dragon, all the other content you're essentially fighting the same units that you can collect as well. But if you think about all the other games that we've seen, each one of them has, you know, a specific dungeon that has an end boss that's very unique. It's got unique skills, interesting passives that you have to somehow bypass them in order to work. We don't see that in this game. And I think that's something that's sorely needed given where the game is at today. But that's more of a PvE focused. But now let's shift our attention to some of the issues we've noticed with PvP as well.
Alright, so I'm sure that anybody who's played this game for long enough and has ventured into the PvP of Exo Heroes will understand that currently the player versus player environment is very, very stale. It has been for a while, and now we're actually seeing a little bit more diversity come in, but let's be honest, it was like solo First Guardians or just like a full team with First Guardians. And the problem with this is when you have like this line of Fate Cores or this line of heroes that is so strong that they dominate the PvP ladder, those with will be able to climb and then stagnate at some point, but those without never have a chance.
Sure.
And it's just very hard to progress without these currently meta heroes, like for instance Bathory, Garf, Rira, Ulum. That's like the meta comp right now.
Yeah.
And everybody had, like, you look at like the top 10, top probably 100 players in PvP, and they'll all have some variation of this composition.
Right.
That shouldn't be the case though, you know?
And I agree. I think that's the biggest issue is I think there is an imbalance in the PvP scene today. Too much focus are on the First Guardian heroes that they just dominate the entire game. And I think from a longevity perspective, you know, that's something that's inhibiting this game to grow even further because players will find it boring. Like you said, players don't have the First Guardians or the top tier First Guardians will find it difficult to really push through the ladder and they're just gonna give up. And I think that's the biggest issue and something that the game definitely needs to look into is to somehow find the balance. I think the Banga Fate Cores have a lot of potential, right? And it just needs a little bit of tweak to maybe make them work as well. And obviously come up with other heroes that would, you know, counter the First Guardians or things like that. And I think the easiest approach that I can think of is really just nerf the First Guardians a little bit. Especially like one thing I really don't like is the fact that the Wrath passive works even if you dodge on a skill. And to me, that just doesn't make sense. Why do you counterattack?
If I didn't hit you.
Yeah, if I didn't hit you, right? Like just certain things that's currently in the game about the First Guardian that make them too overpowered. And I think some balancing there is sorely needed given just how boring the PvP scene has been. Ever since we got First Guardian Rira, that has been our stable go-to DPS for, I don't know, 3-4 weeks now. And we've just been able to use her. And we never have to give a second thought about, oh, should we swap someone else in? Because she is just clearly superior than everyone else. And I don't think the game should be like that, especially in PvP, where you really want to reward player for their ingenuity and their creativity. Right? Taking that away by putting a specific lineup of heroes that are clearly superior than everyone else, it really takes a lot of agency away from your player base.
You know, we were talking about diversity within PvP, and one of the points that I wanted to sort of ask you about is, what would you prefer personally? Do you want a power creep? Like right now we have First Guardians very strong, and then Heart Strike passive is sort of the answer to First Guardians. But would you rather have something that is an answer to Heart Strike and even stronger than that? Or would you rather just have Heart Strike and First Guardian nerfed to a more reasonable level?
I think the easiest way is to just have a little bit of balancing and nerfing them a little bit.
Okay.
But obviously you have a lot of other heroes, right? Like just creating a new set of heroes that are also good in a PvP situation, right? Doesn't benefit the rest of the heroes that are currently not relevant in the game. You know, one of our tier lists, we mentioned, you know, heroes like FC Ramga. very unique kit, very interesting in terms of his playstyle. It's intended to be in a way that's different than most of other Fated heroes, but it doesn't have a place today because the game under current meta does not promote that style of play. And I think unless there is a sort of a nerf to some of the other dominant comps, those heroes that are not relevant today will never be relevant. And I think that's a waste because the devs putting a lot of effort into creating these heroes, you know, both graphically as well as in terms of their story, in terms of skill. It's a shame to not see those heroes to ever see the spotlight. So I think some sort of balancing where we can bring down these dominant team comps today to a more reasonable level and give other heroes an opportunity to shine would be the best approach.
Right. I mean, for me personally, I actually disagree. And I think that one of the points is because this imbalance in PvP is intentional, right? Like, with First Guardians being strong, they're relatively hard to get compared to, you know, all of the, like, Ramga or these base Fated heroes that are maybe B or C tier in our tier list. And there's a reason for that, right? Because people, or the devs want people to pay for this game. Somebody needs to be paying for the game. And for any gacha, that's always going to be the whales that are sustaining that business model. And so when you look at it from that perspective, you want them to be fighting against each other. Like, let's say the top 1,000 PvP players are all like massive whales. Well, we can just really treat that as like the whale PvP and like everything below that as the non-whale PvP, right? Because I think that at that top level, you're always going to need something that's overpowered, that is so dominant and superior over these other units, but make it hard to get. And then that's where, you know, that's kind of what helps sustain the other content creation for this game. So I'm okay with sacrificing a little bit of PvP fairness for that, in the sense that, you know, unless you have really high aspirations for, you know, where you want to end up on the ladder, it's, for me, okay to just accept that, you know, I'm a free-to-play player, or maybe I'm a dolphin, and I'm not expecting to be like, you know, top 10. So if things are a little bit imbalanced, that's okay. And to me, I think that power creeping is actually more fun, and then it just adds more content to the game where, like, it makes you want a unit, right? Because if you nerf First Guardians and Heartstrike, and then you release another set of passives in a Fate Core that is like also on that same nerfed level, then it becomes less special, and like Fate Cores become less special.
Sure.
So I think that, you know, to keep some of that rarity that keeps the game going, I would actually prefer power creep personally.
Sure.
If you guys disagree, if you're watching this video and you would prefer power creep or nerfs, my method or Hal's method, go ahead and leave us a comment about why, and we'd love to talk more about that.
Yeah. And then I think lastly, let's just quickly touch on the one last thing we want to bring up is this idea of AI. So far, this has probably been one of the most frustrating things that I've encountered with this game. It's a lack of intelligence in the game's AI. Like, I can't put it any other way. The way the game has been designed is these characters are simply not maximizing their potential when they're controlled by the AI. I cannot remember how many times I've looked at, you know, my Anastasia in the Holy Dragon Grounds run. 5 of my heroes are all low HP, and there she is sitting on 5 mana, and instead of healing, she uses her A2, and my team dies next turn. It's so frustrating when that type of thing happens, and it happens so frequently as well. And I think that's one of the issue with this game is, obviously with any gacha games, there's an AFK component to it, right? People aren't going to be able to sit with their phone on and play these games all the time. So most of the time, when they're farming, when they're doing other things, they just want the game to play by itself. And that's okay if the game can handle the correct decision making. But I think at this moment, there is simply a lack of complexity when it comes to the game's AI. And a lot of wrong choices are being made in terms of what skill should I be using, like who should I be targeting when I'm healing, if it's a single target heal, who should I be targeting when I'm debuffing someone, if it's a single target debuff. I think the game is severely lacking in that regard, and it's something that I want to see improvement in the near future.
I completely agree. Now, you know, as for solutions, like how can this be better? You're talking about improvements and changes.
Hire a better programmer.
I mean, yes. So I think that ultimately, on a very micro level,
Sure.
like of course you will need, like a development team that has maybe more focus on working on this element of the game. Definitely, and I think that's something that in the long term needs to be established. But for a short-term solution, something that I think, now again, I'm not a technical guy, I'm not somebody that knows a lot about coding or game development, but what I have seen in other games is where you'll have characters, or games that have auto battling, right? You'll have characters and you can maybe set up a comp, or for each character specifically you could set up this thing called a paradigm.
Sure.
Right? Which is like, when you go into the battle, this is your priority.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you can set this for, let's say I have a team comp and I set it to, there's like three kinds: balance, attack, and defense. Well, if you set it to an attack paradigm, then your Anastasia will prioritize attacking. If you set it to a defense paradigm, your Anastasia will prioritize saving up mana and healing. Or, something like that. Your Garth will prioritize maybe defending or saving up mana and using a utility skill.
Right.
And so I think that when you think about a short-term solution that could be a good quality of life buff to the game, I think things like that would be relatively feasible, right? Just have some sort of switch, some sort of way to say, okay, when I'm doing this content, I want this paradigm on. I want it to be offensive so I can clear it quicker because I'm confident my team won't die. Yeah. But in Holy Dragon Grounds, if there's a lot of outgoing damage, you could bring maybe 2 healers and then set your team paradigm to defensive. So like Chatty's always shielding instead of hitting her sleep, right?
Right. I agree,
so things like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But I think in the long run, and this is something I don't want to get too far down the details, but I think it's something that we've seen with a lot of other games in the industry is a lot of devs are just so focused on monetizing their game, and a lot of their resources when it comes to money are spent on promoting their games, marketing
Raid
their
Shadow
games, Raid Shadow Legends, right? Like it just, and then they're overlooking the core of the game, which is the gameplay, right? It's the coding behind it, it's the game design, the story design behind it. And I hope that's something that we don't see with Exos Heroes. Is based on what we've seen, there are a lot of effort being put into creating this world that's intriguing and interactive, creating characters that are unique yet at the same time interconnected with each other. And I hope the developer will continue to put their resource into these key areas of the game, whether it's game design or coding to improve their AI, things like that, to make the game better in terms of quality of life changes, rather than focus just on the promotions. But one thing that does give us a little bit hope is, as far as I can see, the Exos Heroes is doing a terrible job at promoting this game. And so I don't know what's going on there, but that's just another thing I want to quickly touch on.
I mean, we had spoken about this off video, off mic, and one of the points is that we keep memeing about Raid Shadow Legends, and everybody who plays Gachas knows their reputation in the industry. And I just am kind of confused about why we have a game that's like, it's beautiful. Like Exo Heroes is such a well-crafted game from a developer that really knows what they're doing, I think, from a game design perspective. But then all of a sudden, during this globalization, I mean, we even noticed it when we're doing our hero spotlights or trying to write a guide, right? We'll notice, wait, this doesn't really make sense. Was it mistranslated?
Right.
Or like, this mechanic doesn't work the way that it's actually written out to work, at least the way that we interpreted it.
Yeah, some of their advertisements are pretty sure are mistranslated, because like when you read it, it just doesn't make sense.
Or like machine generated.
Yeah, like it's very...
So I just feel like the game itself is so well made, but this sort of auxiliary support material for
isn't quite there.
Yeah, it's really not on that same level. So we think that that's another thing that they can improve on. And this is more for like, bringing in players, like having a more active, because if right now PvP is like the only thing that's like really keeping players playing, because unless you just want to do dailies every day, which is fine if you're a casual player, but for somebody that's really invested, they're going to want to climb the ladder. But you can't do that if there's no players, right? So we do think that Exo Heroes marketing could be a little bit better.
Absolutely.
And then just clean up some quality of life, like you were saying, right? So those are all sort of our take on the state of the game currently, where we think it is, how we think they're doing, and some potential solutions. Like we mentioned earlier, we would love to hear your guys' thoughts and just spark some discussion, right? Like, let us know how your experience has been and your perspective and your thoughts on the game, and we would love to chat with you in the comments or in the thread. And so please let us know. If you like this video, give us a like and subscribe as always, and we will see you guys next time.
See you guys.